This is what my Bullet Heaven roguelike looked like 8 months ago, and since then it has gone through crazy changes to the point where it doesn't even look like the same game. What started out as a small transitionary project has gone through a Kickstarter, many playtests, and soon a public demo for all of you to try. Let me share with you the full development of Soulstalker so far. So Soulstalker started out as a little prototype last October, and the earliest video I have of it was from the 28th of October 2022. This is what it looks like, and it was more of a test more than anything, but I wanted to see if making 2D characters appear in a 3D world would solve the limitation that games in this genre have. The limitation that making 3D bullet heavens is super hard on hardware because of how much has to be rendered on screen. I felt that the test was a success because the performance numbers I was seeing were good, but I left it at that for the rest of the month. So November was the month that I started feeling that this project was going to be one that went beyond a prototype, and so I set up source control for it. The cool thing about this is that I actually get to see exactly what dates I did what, so for the rest of the video you'll be getting some really granular details about the specifics of the game's development. So the first thing I did this month was get the map system working, and how it works is pretty similar to Slay the Spire. How it works in that game is that you have a map when you start a run, and you progress by making your way through the nodes. In Soulstalker, the map works similarly, and this is what it looked like when I first finished the implementation on the 4th of November. I want to give a shout out to Game Dev Journey on YouTube for the awesome framework that I used to get my version running, so check their video out if you want to do something similar. After adding the map, I also added the early shop system that had 3 items instead of the current 4, but at this point in the game you purchase stuff by spending levels, and you gain levels by defeating enemies in encounters. This ended up not being the best way of approaching the currency system in the game, so you'll see that the approach will change later on. Another thing I did in November was add elites, which are special enemies that are tougher to beat but give better rewards, and we added a new member to the team, Tim the musician. And at this point, Tim the artist, yes, they're both called Tim, had already been doing the character art for the game, but Tim started doing the music at this point, and all of the music that you hear in this devlog is actually made by him specifically for Soulstalker. And so the final edition for November was the quest system, and originally it followed a battle pass-like structure where you only had 4 quests at a time and then you'd level up and then unlock stuff, but this changed later on because having just 4 quests at a time felt like an unnecessary limitation. The first thing I did in December was add Vixen, a new character, and as always, Tim the artist was the one who created and animated the character, and it turned out super well. This character specifically was an interesting addition because it was the first character that was projectile based instead of using melee attacks. And you can see in the same commit message where I added Vixen, I also added more weapons and adjusted balance, and it was to go hand in hand with the new projectiles. Another change I made this month was move away from the XP system, and instead made it such that enemies drop coins. And the problem with the XP system was that there wasn't much room to make shop prices more variable unless I made the levels appear super frequently, and that approach doesn't really make much sense since it's a bit of a band-aid that is better dealt with the coin system. Beyond the currency changes, I also added the Act 1 boss of the game, which looks something like this, but more importantly, this month was the one where I added Unity's new input system. And what that means is not only that the game got controller support for PC, but also that it had all the input hooked up properly for when we do the Nintendo Switch ports. And so I did a bit of port testing as well. The last thing I did in December was start refactoring the quest system to move it away from the battle pass styled approach and make it a bit more like a regular achievement system. But all of this was mostly in code, so there's not much visual to show here. January kicked off by changing how trinkets work. And basically, trinkets are passive items that give you boosts that can be as simple as a 10% damage increase, or as complicated as making bleed applications cause explosions. So before this point, you could only have a limited amount of trinkets at a time, but you could also level them up to increase their potency, kind of like Vampire Survivors. I decided after some testing that this approach was quite limited for the game design angle that I was taking, so I ended up changing it to make it such that you can have an unlimited number of trinkets, but you can no longer level them up. Similarly, I changed the weapon system to make weapons level up an infinite amount of times, but the upgrades were purely statistical. This will change later on in April, but for now, this is how it works. Finally, I ended January by adding a new character, Quijano. This one was a bit of a test to see how unique I can make characters while still keeping them fun, and I think it worked out pretty well. This one's passive ability is that it can only upgrade its HP and weapon cooldown, so everything else stays the same for the whole run, but those 2 stats are increased at a higher rate. Since the character has a low base speed stat, it really encourages this kind of interesting tank-like build. Adding ice explosions was how February started off, and that was for the new character we were implementing, Tempest. And after that, I implemented a few more boring things like being able to see character stats in the main menu, adding Tim's menu music, and giving players the option to not only choose their starting weapon when starting a run, but also their starting trinket. Some games in this genre, like Brotato and 20 Minutes Till Dawn, allow you to choose your starting weapon, but I wanted to let players to be able to express themselves even more, so adding a trinket choice was a great way of doing that. After the semi-boring menu stuff, I started preparing to do a closed demo in preparation for the Kickstarter I was going to run in March, which is the month after this one. And the first core thing I did was set up analytics. The framework that I used for this was Firebase, since I was familiar with this, and I'm super glad that I implemented analytics in general because they gave me so much good data to do balancing. We had about 100 people in the testing group, so we felt like there was enough playing going on to make the data statistically significant. Some of the data that I set out for collection was win rate, gold over time, health over time, weapon usage, character usage, and most interestingly, also win rate depending on what music was playing. At this point, we had 4 random songs that could play in the demo at random, and I wanted to see if maybe more high energy songs affected how much players won, and crazily enough, it did. Thanks to all this data and survey-based feedback, I made tons of additions over the next weeks, like making maps smaller, giving certain attacks clearer telegraphs, and somewhere in the middle, we also added a new character, Penny. Penny is interesting because she gets stronger as you gain more coins, but the coins also slow you down considerably. So there's this interesting push and pull going on between trying to get as many coins as possible, while also upgrading your speed stat and spending whenever possible so you're not too encumbered. March was a super important month for Soulstalker because it was when the Kickstarter started. Because of this, I spent the first part doing a few boring things like updating the way the shop decides what items to show you, and also creating a localization system and translated the game to French and Spanish. After adding this, I launched the Kickstarter together with a public demo, and although this one didn't have analytics on it, the amount of feedback I got was amazing. Because of it, I made an insane number of adjustments and added tons of content. The number one complaint at this point was that it felt like there weren't enough synergies in the game, and that was mostly because there just wasn't enough content yet since it was a demo. I made this my number one priority to fix and just went all out on adding items and weapons that added synergistic combos. There were a few other things that I added for player clarity, like adding a difficulty rating in the character select screen so that players would know what they're getting into when choosing a character. But there were also other cool additions like adding an ascension system that made the game harder, a new character, and overall more content. Soulstalker's Kickstarter campaign finally finished on April to a huge success, and so I started preparing a roadmap for the early access that backers of certain tiers got access to. This is what it ended up being. So far, we haven't missed a single update, and as you can see, the first item in the roadmap was the weapon upgrade rework. As I explained earlier, the weapon upgrade system used to allow you to buy duplicates of a weapon to increase that weapon's stats, but it wasn't very strategic, so it felt like I needed a rework. What we landed on was a system that allowed you to modify weapons whenever you entered a campfire, and that ended up feeling much better. Funnily enough, I actually also made a devlog entirely on that, so check it out after this video if that interests you. Another huge addition that I made in April was Act 2. Until this point, runs were about 8 minutes long, and they consisted of an act and then a boss at the end of it. With the addition of Act 2, runs were now 16 to 20 minutes long and had 2 bosses in total. This was a huge undertaking, but it was received really well by the backers, so I couldn't be happier about that. There was tons more included in that update, like the reworking of some enemies and the addition of more content, but I'll leave that for another time. Apart from trinkets and weapons, we also added a new character, Shrapnel, which has an archetype revolving around explosions, and is probably one of the most fun characters to play if you can get the right synergies going. May saw the largest additions to the game by far. Not only did I finally add the reworked quest system to the game, but we also added tons of content. There were so many items and weapons added that the game's total size was increased by 27%. Other additions include a new character and 2 more ascension levels, so it's safe to say that May was a good month for Soulstalker backers. I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly what was added because it's a lot of granular stuff and a lot of items and weapons that aren't really interesting to show off. But if you check out the Kickstarter page for Soulstalker, you can check out all the patch notes for every single major update since the Kickstarter finished. Here we are, at June, the month that this video is coming out. There's so much that we did this month, and yet most of it we can't show. We have 2 characters that are actually already finished, but we won't reveal them just yet, and we're already working on a 3rd one as well. On top of this, we actually have a demo that's going to come out on the 19th of June through the Steam Next Fest. It won't have all of the content that's available to the backers, but it'll have a really good amount of stuff, and I think you're all really going to enjoy it. Overall, in the past 9 months of development of Soulstalker, we've created 2 acts, 4 essential levels, 14 characters, 24 weapons, 47 trinkets, 23 enemies, 21 songs, tons of reworks and new features, and just a lot more that doesn't really quantify as well. As you can see, the team and I have put in so much love into this game, and we can't wait for you to play it. The game will be coming out in early access later this year, and we actually already have a release date planned, but won't announce it just yet. If you want to support the game, I've put a link below where you can wishlist it, which will notify you when both the demo and the game come out, and in general, it really helps us get boosted in the eyes of Steam. There's going to be tons of news in the coming months, not only for Soulstalker, but for our other games too, so keep an eye out for that. And that's all for now. Until next time.